it starts with the customer. They talk about knowing their audience and their needs, but they never know how to frame it in a way that the message comes through and tells the story. And they never know how the conversation, that this is a conversation, it's not a one and done, and that you need to really think through how those messages come through.
Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the show where we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders on what it takes to break through that business inertia and propel you and your business forward. I'm your host, Connie Steele. Driving growth for your business requires you to have a solid customer acquisition focus and retention plan. Yet determining the right strategy and executing it effectively is becoming more challenging with the ever-changing buyer's journey, limited marketing budgets, and the need to keep up with the latest technologies and your competitors. Here to share her perspective on what it really takes to break through is Anita John, founder of ARJ Consulting, a marketing consultancy that provides expertise in igniting demand and creating true customer engagement at every touchpoint so businesses are efficiently maximizing revenue and customer loyalty. Anita brings more than 20 years of experience working in direct response roles for companies including Intuit, StubHub, and Time Life. And today, she's sharing her advice on how to build and execute campaigns that effectively build relationships, retain customers, and realize business objectives. But before we hear from Anita, I want to take the time to invite anyone listening to get in touch if there's a leader you want to hear from or topics you want to learn about on the show. The Strategic Momentum Podcast is all about helping you get the tips and advice to propel you and your business forward in any role or industry. So if you have ideas for anything you want covered, I'd love to hear from you. Send your thoughts to info@flywheelassociates.com or by reaching out on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. Now, let's get into Anita's story.
There's a lot of ups and downs to this. So I actually started my career here in DC, and it was working at an association, believe it or not, but that's really where I got my first view into direct marketing. And everything I do now is kind of built on this construct of direct marketing. And nobody really calls it that anymore. Everybody calls it digital marketing, they call it lead generation, but ultimately it's about direct response marketing and getting the most out of your conversations with people and tracking and so forth. After I started the association, I went to grad school, and then I went to a local publishing company here in the DC area. And again, a area where the focus was direct response marketing. And they were actually, this was at a time we didn't have digital marketing in place. And they were the top 200 direct mailers for the USPS, which means that they spent a lot of money, which means they had to figure out how to optimize their spend and figure out how to use direct marketing in the best way to drive response. So that meant personalized communications, it meant targeting, all the things people talk about today. We were doing that years ago in direct mail.
Anita's experience at this publishing company taught her the importance of targeted marketing, having that one-on-one relationship through direct response, because she was responsible for marketing the various product lines they sold to the subscribers of these newsletters they produced. In fact, with some senior management turnover, Anita was left running a part of the business that drove 90% of the revenue.
They had a very interesting model, which is they had editors of newsletters, and we actually worked with the editors to formulate the products. And then these multiple product lines were marketed to the subscribers of these newsletters. And it was a very interesting model. And again, working with the idea of targeting and working with talking to customers one-on-one through direct response is what I learned. But it was also a point where when I started, I had the hiring manager that brought me in left, went and moved to Chicago. And then her manager also left, and left me with running a part of the business that drove 90% of the revenue. Now, it seems like a lot for somebody who was just out of grad school, and it was, but I actually think that was the best learning experience I could ever do, because I had to learn on the fly, on the job with myself, asking questions in the right way, and really, learning the business from the ground up.
During her tenure at the publishing company, Anita successfully managed one of the most important areas for the business. But she realized she wasn't getting recognized for her work, and subsequently was dealing with a general manager who, as she tells us,
was not probably the kindest. And as somebody who was, just out of graduate school, dealing with the experiences of management styles, it was unnerving.
But fortunately, things changed where there was a shift in management, and Anita found a mentor who caused her to reframe how she started to think about marketing to her customers.
And one of the greatest things that happened in my life is I found a mentor who came in as a consultant to this subsidiary, who really taught the idea of thinking about customer first and thinking about how a customer's life is with that product or service. And his name was Rich Goldwater. And I had, unfortunately, he passed away like a year and a half ago. He actually was the one person that showed me how when you empower people and you give them the feeling that they are important in a pursuit of, the higher revenue and so forth, they will continue to contribute for you. And so while you're thinking about that, you're also thinking about, well, how do I do that for the customer? And so that's really another area that I started to kind of meld together is really, how do you give people the feeling that you're going to help them? And the same way a good manager helps you feel like they're going to support you in what you do. So I took that, but I also felt like because I wasn't getting appreciated after a certain amount of time, it was time for me to move on.
Anita took that insight and perspective to a subsequent role at Time Life, but wasn't fulfilled as she'd hoped she'd be. The publishing company she had worked at prior asked her to come back, and she did, but that was with some regret.
And it was also at the time where AOL and Time Warner were looking at merging. So Time Life was affected by some of this as well. So it was a perfect storm. And I decided to go back. Well, when I went back, it didn't feel the same as before. And probably one of the biggest lessons I learned at that time is to never go back. If you're going to leave a company, you make sure that you're going to leave and not look backwards, always look forwards.
As luck would have it, a needed vacation in San Francisco, visiting a friend, turned into an unexpected opportunity. And the serendipitous experience taught her an important lesson.
So when I did that, and I knew like maybe this wasn't the best move, I decided to take a vacation. And as I was taking that vacation, I had another friend, and this was in San Francisco, and decided, he said to me, why don't you just pack an extra interview outfit, because there's a job at my company. I think you should just come here and meet with everybody. So I did. And within 3 weeks, I had a new job and I moved out to San Francisco. And again, another lesson learned is that, take every opportunity. Don't, just because you're comfortable in something, don't hold back in taking a job interview. You never know what could come from that. And the opportunity for me was not just a new job, but it was also a new life in a new area of the country. And it was a fantastic move for me.
In her 13 years she spent working in the Bay Area, she progressed in her career working for big blue chip companies like Morgan Stanley Online and Intuit, as well as progressive startups at the time like StubHub and Xero. But what Anita learned in all of her experiences, as well as refined, was how to truly live that customer-centric way of marketing, regardless of the medium or channel or even industry. This all coupled with the world of technology that required her to be adept and adjust to the rapid changes that were and still are constantly occurring.
about when you went over to San Francisco, you also then shifted to spending a lot of time with technology companies versus, in the past you're working for publishing companies. What was that transition like?
Again, when you focus in on the customer, it's about just understanding, like spending time understanding the product that you're selling to those customers and helping them. And I remember, again, from my publishing days, it was helping people in the ways that they desire that they may not know yet. And if you stay with that focus, and then you then look at the products that you have available to you, it was an easy transition to go from publishing, because we were already living in the world of targeting and personalization. All you really needed to do was try and understand the customer and the products that you are serving. And so I didn't really think that there was much of a transition. However, the world of technology just changes rapidly. So what really I had to do there is move fast. So you have to think smart and move fast. So you really are on your feet every week and every day trying to make adjustments in what you're doing. So that's probably the biggest transition.
And thinking smart while moving fast is even more of the case when you work in a startup environment.
I mentioned time, you have to move fast. You have to even move faster in startup. You have less of the resources in front of you. So you've got to figure out how you resource this with less money, less time, and more expectations. And I think that really keeps you on your toes to figure out how to be the jack of all trades in everything and be perfect in everything that you do. So you can't just be good at strategy. You can't just be good at execution, and you can't be just good at reporting. You need to be able to do all really well and be able to tell that story of how to manage all of those together.
Through these career and life experiences, some where she faced professional inertia, burnout, and even dealt with unexpected loss, Anita learned the importance of balance, prioritizing what really matters, and the need to ultimately do what's right for you and others. And for Anita, that passion for maximizing business impact by having a comprehensive view of the customer and connecting strategy through execution led her to establishing her consulting business.
That actually is why I ended up deciding to go into consulting, and also being able to do the strategy and implementation together. It was essential for me, as I got more satisfaction out of it than just doing strategy. So that's kind of how I went into consulting. It's a long story. It's many different small roads to one main area, but it was all well worth it.
And though Anita's path wasn't directly linear, it had a logical unraveling. Her career progression and work success came from her inclination to take risks and test and learn along the way, because it was always about looking forward and not backwards. This mindset, coupled with this lens of always putting the customer first, delivering value and building that personal relationship, is core to how Anita approaches acquiring and retaining customers for her clients. But Anita sees that many companies still struggle when it comes to driving demand or customer engagement through their marketing campaign efforts. So what are they doing wrong?
One, it starts with the customer. They talk about knowing their audience and their needs, but they never know how to frame it in a way that the message comes through and tells the story. And they never know how the conversation, that this is a conversation, it's not a one and done, and that you need to really think through how those messages come through. And then the other thing is that when they talk about testing, they're not testing the right elements. So they think by testing a color or a change in one word or two words will impact response. It doesn't. You have to, when you go into any test, learn, and refine aspect of marketing, at least from direct response, you're never going to know what you're going to get, but you should go in with some gut, and the gut should tell you, you know what, I should see a 20 to 30% lift from whatever I do. And if you don't have that gut, you shouldn't even test it, because likelihood that result is only going to be a 5 to 10%. So you need to move the needle pretty far. And to move the needle with testing, you need to feel like it could be a gangbuster. So I think that's one of the things that I've learned too. They don't know the customer as well as they think. And they really need to walk in the shoes of the customer like a salesman does, and spend the time to figure that out. And I don't think people do. They have a brand message and they want to get that message out, but they don't think how the customer needs impact those and what's the best way to test them.
So almost another point would be, there isn't a clear hypothesis on what it is that a customer may need, or and the other way to think about it is that there isn't a hypothesis on what the potential outcome could be based on a full understanding of what the customer need would be.
Yes. And I think where people fall short is they don't forecast it, and they don't try to look at this in the sense of, okay, I know I'm going to do some testing. What's the outcome going to be in terms of the revenue? And make it, something that if you're going to even tell this to senior management, you need to be able to give them some reason why you need to do the test that you do. And the number is a very important aspect of it. So the forecast is very important.
And unfortunately, understanding what it means to truly test and learn to optimize results isn't something that many seem to fully grasp, Anita shares.
And in the marketing, the test, learn, and refine aspect of marketing is a technique really that comes out of direct response marketing. And because you have to optimize your costs, especially when we were doing a lot of direct mail, the cost could be pretty substantial. So looking and managing those costs were critical. I actually even feel like people don't fully understand what test, learn, and refine really means. Sometimes I feel like people say, hey, I'm going to test, LinkedIn and do some marketing there, but they don't know how to set up the test and control properly to get accurate reads, so that when you actually decide to scale, and we called it rollout. When you test, you're doing small segments, and then you need enough results to say, you know what, if I roll this out to 1 million people, this is in direct mail, 1 million pieces of mail, I better be sure that I could get the same results. Well, today people just say, well, it doesn't cost that much in LinkedIn. I can just try it. And they call it a test. In the traditional sense of it, it's not really a test. And they need to figure out, people need to sort of figure out what that means. But that's the world we live in right now. But I live in a world where you actually have a test and control.
Well, what it sounds like as well is that from your direct response experience, you've really learned this foundation of how to effectively, test such that you're able to drive towards really the right outcomes. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say so. What's very interesting in the direct response world, we have what we call the 40-40-20 rule, or we had that. And that 40-40-20 rule is 40% of your list, 40% is your offer, and 20% is the creative. That should help you determine, if you move those levers, what will help drive the response. So 40% of your response is driven from the list, so you better get it right. And the offer that you make to those people better be strong enough. And that ratio actually worked fairly well in direct mail. Now in digital, I look at it as a 30-30-20-10. So 30% your offer, 30% your list, 20% your creative, and then 10% is timing now, because of the immediacy and the time from a campaign going out to it actually finalizing is much shorter than in direct mail, because now a campaign can finalize within 24 hours, where for us in direct mail, it used to be 30 days. So very different.
You seem to have a very strong philosophy too around this notion of optimization. Obviously, there's optimization that you always need to do based on that direct response foundation, but certainly you've spent that time optimizing really the learning around your customer and taking that customer-centric view in across every type of campaign or effort that you've done.
Sure. Yes, that's definitely true. Where I feel like what happens now with optimization, or with this test, learn, and refine idea, there are certain things that always seem to happen, and you can actually apply learnings from different industries across the board. So, like, I know in a world of email, a 3 email series is always where you want to start. You never want just one. You never want two. A 3 is where you start. Now, you may want to add, but likely you never remove 3. It'll always be that. In direct mail, there's always 2. I also know that if you put an offer in place, and an offer really is more of a what's in it for me, not so much of the education and the content piece. It's more of, hey, you get a free assessment when you sign up for our newsletter. Well, that actually will drive response. It could from 10 to 20%. It's just kind of, the lessons learned from doing enough testing and learning throughout different industries.
This discipline toward testing and learning in marketing campaigns is something that Anita has developed over years of experience across many industries. But while it now seems like standard practice to employ this approach, the fundamentals from Anita's perspective are still not properly employed.
Do you find that people are testing to just say they're testing because they feel that they need to, versus having a clear objective around it?
Oh, absolutely. I think, a lot of people, when they go into testing, they see, and I'm talking from a digital aspect, people in our world talk A/B testing all the time. Hey, in email, let's do an A/B subject line test. Let's do a digital test. Let's do web versus, social. But they don't know what that really means. And they also don't realize if you change one criteria. So if your ad looks just slightly different from web versus social, then it's not really a test. You're just getting some ideas around a channel, and does the channel work? And then within there, you want to go in and test further into that channel. You can't say that social versus display works better or vice versa without making sure your criteria is apples to apples. And I think a lot of people miss that too. They don't do apples to apples testing.
So it sounds like that people don't really have a clear understanding of what testing parameters to put forth from the beginning, that it is maybe somewhat, off the cuff, that they choose, well, we'll test A versus C or whatever parameters they choose.
Yeah. And they don't know, and they don't fully understand the idea of, what those changes could impact your overall results, and being able to tell, accurately, that test A worked better than test B, and for what reasons. The reasons then get lost if you don't have the right criteria.
Why do you think that's such a challenge? Or what do you think is driving that fundamental lack of discipline from the beginning?
I think it's a mindset. It's critical thinking and logic. I mean, that's really the two things that you need with test, learn, and refine. You may have the big picture from a brand, but unless you know some of the logistics that go into the testing, and also be able to understand that any shift in parameters could impact results, you lose it. So if you don't have that mindset, it's really hard. The problem is also people come, especially in marketing, there are a lot of people that say, I do acquisition marketing, and it's great because they drive the top of the funnel, and it's really easy to generate impressions. It's really from a digital, and I'm speaking digital, so it's easy to generate impressions. But how do those impressions translate? Do they convert to buyers or to users? People lose that step, and they may say that the top of the funnel is working, but it's really not, because it's driving marginal impressions, let's say. So that's I think a fundamental problem in the way people do acquisition marketing.
It seems like there's that gap in connecting the strategy through the execution to ensure the right campaign, one, is initiated, but two, to also determine how effective it is, and then how to subsequently optimize.
Well, and I think what happens really is on the upfront. So if you don't have the critical mindset or critical thinking, you don't have the logistics in your mind when you're setting up the strategy, you don't know how to figure out your test plan. So a lot of people say, hey, I'm going to test after the planning has been done, whereas they actually need to set up their test with their strategy. It isn't an afterthought. Everything has become an afterthought for testing because it's there.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily considered that testing and learning is part of the planning process, is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. And in our world, in direct marketing, you basically set up your strategy. So any campaign or any overarching way you're going to approach your acquisition efforts focuses in on the immediate, like, what do the campaigns look like, but what is your test going to look like as you go into developing and your action steps. So you've got to build out a test matrix. What does that forecast look like? What's the value of it? And then you build that into your action steps.
It's almost like developing a product, almost taking a agile development approach to, direct marketing, digital marketing.
It is so true. I haven't thought about it that way, but it is actually very much that way, because in the world of product, and this is actually going back to my time doing vitamin supplements, when you do product development, period, you have betas and you test the validity of the ingredients that you're putting in. And before you actually develop and you market this. And that's really what we do in direct marketing. We do the same thing. We look at all the ingredients that are going into a marketing campaign or the overall strategy. And then we say, okay, let's validate this with some testing. And these are the things that we're going to do before we roll this out. And so the rollouts are really about, okay, with your strategy, you're going to do some tests, and then you're going to take that, extrapolate it to a larger population. And that larger population is based on the results from your test. And a lot of people don't know how to do that.
And so where in this case, in direct marketing, or I should say, so in the product development sense, what you're doing is you're trying to optimize for the end product experience. In your case, you're really optimizing for revenue and how to drive, well, one, not just, having a tight relationship with the customer, but you're also balancing that with optimizing revenue.
Yeah. And so that's exactly right. Because what you're doing is you're taking the messages that, again, to help people in the ways that they desire that they may not know yet, we're helping them understand it so that the revenue comes. And the only way to do that is to also test to figure out what's the right way to do it.
No marketer or campaign is perfect, but there are definitely approaches to ensure your campaign is getting the results you're after. If you're only looking at the top of the funnel or the number of impressions to determine success, you're not likely to meet your end goal because you don't have the right data to optimize. So think about applying the agile development approach to your campaigns. Think of your beta and look at all the variables that affect the outcome and experiment with how you optimize them. And of course, be sure you've clearly defined your outcome. You have to test for the validity of these variables. That means adequately evaluating whether or not it will lead to the outcome you wanted. Ultimately, you test again and again until you can prove this result is repeatable at a large scale. And never forget your fundamentals. This even applies to terms that are used to define acquisition and retention marketing, Anita explains.
What's happening, though, is that there's a confusion because now you've got so many terms. You've got target marketing. You've got demand generation. You've got lead generation. You've got acquisition marketing. You've got retention. You've got conversion. Yeah, all of that is just confused the marketplace, period. So what you have to realize, it's whatever is most comfortable for a company and how they view it. If they say demand generation, to me, again, I look at it as acquisition. So as a consultant, I go in and I think, okay, they're looking at acquisition marketing and they are targeting segments of the population, and they should be end to end, because that's really what demand generation is. You're looking at the end to end in a certain segment of your population to figure things out. In the lead generation world, they were looking more at, this is the life stage of everybody, and everybody who is a lead, we will treat them a certain way, less on the targeting by industry and so forth. So even though there were product differences here and there, people just looked at it as one big bucket. I think we again, in the direct response world, we've always done targeting, and we've always, from an acquisition and retention, and we always look at personalization. We always look at leads and how do you convert them. Personally, I just don't even care about any of these buzzwords. If people just simply call it acquisition, they will feel so much better about what they're doing.
So what does it take to break through and build the right momentum around and find the right resources for your acquisition and retention marketing efforts? Hint, it's not all about the tools to help you do it.
The type of people that come in to do true acquisition retention marketing should be very logical thinkers, critical thinkers. It is not the ethereal, I just want to do a broad brush. Hey, LinkedIn is great. Let's just start marketing there. Or Facebook is great. Let's just do it. People who think, who can be more methodical in their thinking is important. And attention to details in the execution. And people buy a lot of tools. People buy a lot of tools to help them with their marketing. They buy reporting dashboards. They buy platforms that work across every social aspect. They buy workflow tools. They buy email, use of email service providers. All of these, again, important, but people don't know how they all work together with their strategy in mind. You've got to be very clear when you're developing your strategy, what you need to execute and how you can scale it. Because the other thing is, there are a lot of tools out there. Some are very expensive, and you may think you can use it. But I have seen more times than not people spending more than they need to on the tools that they have. Because honestly, the beautiful thing about technology these days and a lot of the online tools is that there are many of them. And there are many that can help you achieve what you need. I think what people do is, it's, again, ties to the latest buzzwords. There are these great tools that help with demand generations. But if you don't know how to use it properly, you don't have the infrastructures to support it, you don't actually execute on your strategy. So that's where I feel like people build out these great strategies, ideal, kind of views without thinking of how it actually can be implemented. And you need the people who can think critically to understand how that works. And, one area I feel like people in in the way I do marketing, especially from a digital aspect, is they forget about marketing operations and the importance of that to help with optimization, believe it or not, because if it takes you too long to execute a test, you're probably not going to do it because resource-wise, it doesn't make sense for you because of the time it takes internally to do it. But if you have the right marketing operations that figures out how to optimize your efforts, it could be seamless and it could be, the most effective strategy. But again, you won't do it unless you have it executed properly. So there are a lot of moving parts in acquisition and retention marketing, and that if somebody doesn't understand what each connecting point does, it's going to force the strategy to fall flat, and that's a big problem.
So my takeaway is the criticality of ensuring you are understanding the interconnectivity and the integration of the people / resources, the process in which you're going to, strategically plan and implement a campaign, but the product or the tools in order to get to the outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah. Because really what we look at are, you've got the strategy, you've got the people to help you do it, you've got the tools to help you do it, and you have the processes in place to support all of those. And if you don't have any one of those, you're going to be lost. And the overarching to all of this is customer first. So if you put your customer hat on, what's the strategy to deliver the message and get your marketing working to drive the highest ROI or revenue, whichever is your goal. And then, are there the people in place to do it that understand how the processes work to get it done, that you can actually use the tools in the right way to drive the maximum results that you need to from your marketing campaigns.
But as you said earlier, it fundamentally starts with having a clear understanding of the customer and ensuring that you can build the right relationship with them through the, acquisition / retention efforts that you're going to be employing. And if you look at your initiatives through that lens, that's where you're fundamentally going to be successful versus focusing too much on the tools or the process or other ancillary things that really aren't what's going to drive the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's for sure. In our world, it's all those pieces need to fit properly. It's the puzzle that needs to fit properly for this to work in the right way. So, and I actually don't think it differs much from mass marketing in the sense that you need to figure out, how you reach the right audience and you have the right messages, but the elements that go into the, any kind of demand generation or lead generation is really very specific to tracking customer activity and creating that one-to-one kind of relationship through the marketing that you're doing.
So to close, knowing what you know now, what advice would you tell your younger self?
It's an interesting thing because I feel like I don't think I would change anything that's happened in my career at all, even some of the missteps. But probably one thing I would say is don't look backwards, always look forwards, and live a life of, that is complete, not just about work and not just about having fun, that you need to actually live a life full of both, and don't try and overwork yourself, because sometimes that doesn't actually amount to a positive for your own well-being. So you have to figure out balance. Balance is very, very important. It's interesting because when I think about, all the jobs that I've had, I always believed and still believe that even if you're comfortable in a job, you should always take an interview. You should always interview and keep not only yourself fresh, but you never know what the opportunities are. And I think that's part of the whole test and learn, which is you are always trying new things, because even though what you are doing is working, you never know if it could work better.
And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Well, the best way is actually email. My email is Anita, ANITAJOHN, at ARJ-consulting.com. I also have a website, ARJ-consulting.com, where people can actually send me a quick note. I have a contact us page there too.
Great. Thanks so much for just really valuable perspective on acquisition and retention marketing.
Glad I could do this.
Thank you.
When it comes to driving customer demand engagement, the most effective strategies are the ones that put people and relationships first. Though many leaders agree on this notion, not everyone is actually practicing it. Every message you send should feel personal to the recipient, whether you're reaching out to 2 people or 20,000. Your message should demonstrate your understanding of the wants and needs of your customer. Tools and resources can be leveraged to facilitate this process, but they need to be used properly, in a way that aligns with the overall strategy. And it's important to be critical and logical thinkers by tying the tactics and technologies back to the fundamental acquisition goals. On a bigger scale, it's about testing and learning to find the balance, a combination of messages, creative, offer, and audience that will turn leads to customers and customers to advocates. Just make sure you're testing the right variables and focusing on what matters most, all to really move your initiatives, your business, and your career forward. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with Anita through her website, arj-consulting.com, or via email at anitajohn@arj-consulting.com. If you've liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. To hear previous episodes or get show notes from this episode, you can visit us at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. And don't forget to follow Strategic Momentum on Facebook and Instagram. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.